JD Beck, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thanks for having me, Will.
JD, you left corporate to buy a small plumbing business in Colorado. It's been a roller coaster, but wholly worth it, you told me in the pre-call. Let's get into it. Start us off with some background on you, please, JD.
Well, I'm from Alabama originally, grew up in Birmingham, went to school at the University of Alabama. I got a degree in electrical engineering, and then I never used it. I went in the Army after college. I was an engineer officer. Doesn't mean I was doing engineering. That took me to Missouri for a little bit, then Fort Carson, Colorado. Had a good 4 years, but didn't really want to do 20 of that, so got out. And then, of all things, had a career in commercial elevators, which one of your former guests was talking about. I think his name was Ben Rizzo.
That's right.
Super interesting podcast to listen to because it was my life for about 8 years. That career took me to San Francisco for about 2, Phoenix for about 2 as well, and then back to Denver. Just love this state. And came back to Denver for a company called TK Elevators, my last stint there. Did about 5 years managing their construction operation. We did about $30 to $50 million a year in revenue, just depending on what was going on. About 5 years in, started looking for the next thing, as we all do, right? And had a couple good job opportunities, both inside of TK and with some other companies as well. There was a job offer that I guess was kind of like the fulcrum, if you will, kind of like the focus point. It was to go manage a small business for a former boss of mine back in California. And great people, great company, liked everybody there. But I brought it back to my wife. My wife was like, I really just don't want to leave Colorado. And I felt the same. And the idea of buying a business was always out there. I had read the book by Harvard Business Review, Buying a Small Business. I'd read that a couple of years prior and seemed to always pick it up every few years or two. Short books you read a couple times. And I said, why not? Let's go ahead and do it. So at that point, my search started in earnest. That was around August of 21.
JD, let me hop in here before we get into your search. So just curious, why did you originally pick up the HBR guide to buying a small business? It's not just a book that most people pick up and read. So there must have been some germ of an idea to buy a business.
Yeah, it seemed like a really good path to generational wealth for a guy like me. I'm not super creative. I'm not the guy that's going to have the next great business idea. I'm not starting Google or anything super interesting. I am not interesting at all. And the idea and
tune out, audience too. You don't have to listen anymore to this boring guy.
Right? No, it struck me as a way to use the skills that I had learned, right? So I got an MBA while I was in the Army. I spent time in the Army as an officer. So you're managing these groups of people from day zero. And then my corporate career was the same thing, right? It was shockingly similar to the Army. It was managing groups of men building things, whether, in San Francisco it was focused on bigger projects, but then in Phoenix, it was 100%. There were 4 to 6 crews of 2 guys building elevators all over the state, right? And then Colorado was the same thing, right? We were 30 to 50 men, just depending on how big of a year it was, building elevators and escalators all over the state of Colorado. So there's not a lot of excitement in the elevator industry. There's, kind of the same thing in the Army. I had a really boring experience in the Army. Boring. Nobody ever shot at me in anger. It was very much so I was an engineer. We build infrastructure for the Army, right? And so the idea of running a startup or something, it crossed my mind, but not something that, I'm sure I'd do fine at it if I ever wanted to do it, but I don't know, something about somebody kind of hands you this business that's already existing, and they've done the really hard work of taking it from 0 to 1. And then I feel like that it's then my job to take it from 1 to 10 or from 10 to 100, So I don't know. It struck me as a way to really use my existing skills to, lever up effectively.
And the levering up piece, because a lot of people may have the same resume as you did, the same experiences and then skills. but there's still an entrepreneurial bent in you that led you to want to buy a business that's still doing anything entrepreneurial is still pretty unusual. So what was it that made you entrepreneurial? Were you an entrepreneurial kid, or is it just the idea you wanted to build generational wealth, which in a W-2 wasn't going to get you there?
My mom, 100%. My mom, she owned her own accounting practice for years with, varying amounts of success. But she instilled it in me from a very young age that, she was big on what's that book called? Like the E-Myth Revisited, I think was a really popular book in the 90s. She really instilled that in me, that there's a very big difference between working for a company and then working for yourself, right? Like the way that I kind of leveled it down was that when you work for a company, they pay you the least amount of money they possibly can. When you work for yourself, you pay yourself the most amount of money you possibly can. Now, the difference is the most amount of money you can pay yourself sometimes is, it might be less than what the man could pay you. But still, she definitely instilled that from a very young age, is that this is the path to really doing something interesting with your career.
Okay. So in some sense, maybe it wasn't inevitable, but it wasn't a surprise that you ultimately struck out on your own.
No, not a surprise. Yeah.
Okay. You said you listened to Ben Rizzo's interview with great interest. That was a very popular episode. Did you think about buying an elevator business? I mean, I guess contextualize the elevator business for searchers out there who may or may not have heard Ben's interview.
Well, I mean, ever since the day I was a young boy, I just dreamt of growing up to become an elevator man. I mean, it was always a goal.
Hey, I think it sounds really cool to own an elevator business.
So did I think about buying an elevator business? Yes, it crossed my mind. They're typically very large companies. So like the company that Ben found, one, he was able to get into it with some very creative financing terms.
That's right.
That I don't think are typically available. And then two, I was a bit geographically constrained in my search. Very much so a search focused on Front Range of Colorado. And there's one, maybe two elevator companies that would be worth it. But the industry is very much so dominated by four majors, and then a couple other companies out of Asia, Mitsubishi and Fujitech as well. So it's kind of like the auto industry. And then so much of my experience on the construction side, where really you're taking a manufactured kit or a product and you're managing the installation of it, very different from the service side that Ben walked in. They're almost two separate things. So in fact, Ben even talks about in his podcast that after about a year or two, the guys of the company, they wanted to go after more modernization projects that were, bigger tickets, much, much larger tickets, but they were a lot more risk. That was the world that I dealt with on the construction side, where everything had liquidated damages. These were million plus, sometimes up to $10-20 million contracts. That's just not something that JD Beck's going to jump into with a small business loan. It would be a very interesting thing to get into. If the opportunity were ever presented to me, I'd be very interested in doing it. But I don't see how one guy, except for Ben, who was able to stumble upon probably the deal of a century, I don't see how one guy just goes out there and chases a company. Although it's funny you mentioned that. I did come across a residential elevator company in my search, but again, I don't know. At that point, I was ready to do something different too.
But JD, it sounds like there's a stark difference between the construction guys, who are the majors, and the complexity of those projects and the risk of those projects is something that a lone searcher is not going to want to tackle. But then there's this service piece, and those where the mom and pops live are strictly service elevator service companies. Good opportunities.
Well, I think they're great opportunities
and that's pretty fragmented, I think, as I recall Ben saying that piece is still pretty fragmented.
So I think the majors still have a very dominant presence, even in the service side, and they're always going to have a bit of an advantage as well, because they manufactured the equipment, right? So You're in the situation where the manufacturer of the equipment is offering to warranty it and then to service it for the life of the equipment and then to modernize it whenever it gets tired. That's a pretty compelling case to a building owner, even if the companies are absolute disasters to deal with sometimes, and they're disasters to deal with for a reason. It's not because they're bad at what they do. It's they're very much so as a reason behind why they operate that way. There's space for a mom and pop company for sure, and they do very well on the service side, and they can play ball in the modernization side as well. But if you could find a mom and pop service company, you would have to focus on like bigger cities. So, I mean, like in my experience, there were a few in San Francisco. There's a few in Los Angeles. I don't know much about the East Coast and never did anything out there, but Pittsburgh is where Ben was, if I remember correctly. Yep. And like that's probably prime market or something like this, where it's a city that's big enough to have like a company that's, I forget what we used to call them, but like a non-major company, right? Like it would be a very interesting space to work in. I think there's actually a lot of private equity groups that are starting to do roll-ups of these companies, much like you see in like the plumbing and HVAC space. So it's there.
Well, that's who bought Ben. Ben sold to PE. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a great opportunity, but man, it's just a whole nother level of cash flow challenges, and just add 1 to 2 digits to every SBA deal, and then I think that's what you're looking at. And then you have a unionized workforce, which actually it was a really good union. I've got great things to say about the union. I think they did a pretty good job as far as unions go. It's a pretty good one to deal with, at least in like the locals I was working with. So I don't know, man. You find a small elevator company you want to buy up, give me a call. I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
Okay. All right. You hear that, audience. Call JD on elevator due diligence. So let's return to your story, JD. So you start, you and your wife, you get this opportunity in California. Your wife says, I don't want to leave Colorado. You realize you also don't want to leave Colorado. Yeah. You're going to stay in Colorado. So now is the moment to think about a pretty hard pivot in your career to go off and become an entrepreneur, to do this buy business thing. Pick us up from there.
Well, yeah. So I started the search where everybody starts. It seems like I got on Biz Buy Sell, which it seems to be the entry point for everybody. Started looking around.
The gateway drug.
Yeah, right. So my last name is Beck. Started looking around. Found this company. They're like, oh, they work on farm equipment or whatever. Turns out we shared the same last name. I guess I probably shouldn't say the company name, but like we shared the same last name, and they worked on equipment way out east in Colorado. Through that, I met a broker, kind of got exposed to the whole broker world, and then just started chasing companies, right? So I remember writing my first LOI and like really getting nervous, and like sending this thing over to the broker to try to buy this business. Well, I'm not sure what was going on. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't like the greatest buyer at the time, which probably is true. You're a first-time buyer trying to do the SBA thing, so it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle. And then this is 2021, so there seemed to have been like a lot of activity at the time. I don't know if it's necessarily still at that same level or not. I haven't really had to do too much of this since then, but there was a lot of competition, and I was not expecting that. Like whenever the broker came back to me and said, "Oh, I forget exactly what he said, but he said like there were 2 or 3 other offers for this one business," and I thought, there is no way there are 3 other people that want to buy this company in Fort Morgan that does whatever it does, right? There's no way. He's got to be pulling my leg trying to get more money out of me. Well, sure enough, there probably were. So so I got outbid on that company, or the seller did something. I'm not 100% sure. So kind of kept on looking, and it wound up being the same story a few times, where you'd write an offer for a company and for whatever reason they didn't pick you. So I don't know what it was. I'm not sure if I was getting outbid, if I wasn't a very attractive buyer, whatever the case may be, but I probably did 2 or 3 LOIs and just couldn't seal the deal. Finally did get a company under LOI. It was a mechanical construction contractor here in Colorado. Believe it or not, they'd actually done some work on some of my elevator projects as well. And but it was all seller finance, which at the time I thought was great. There's no real risk here. Had got to deal with a bank. This sounds awesome. Well, companies that are 100% seller finance, there's a reason for it. And I kind of started to figure that out about 2, 3, 4 weeks into due diligence, and wound up backing out of the deal it took me longer than it should have. It took me about 10, 12 weeks, and I eventually did back out of the deal because I kind of decided that it wasn't worth what they were asking for. It's worth about half. And then actually I found another broker who offered to do a broker's statement of value, right? It's not a full appraisal, but was willing to actually like sit down and for like $2,000, he wrote up this nice report and about like what he thought the business was worth. That $2,000 was worth more than my MBA. I mean, that was, I learned so much from that one failed deal. Like, it was phenomenal. So, I mean, yeah,
well,
failed deals
tell us
suck.
more, JD. What do you mean? So from this document, you had a third party appraisal of this business you wanted to buy.
Yes.
And what was so valuable in this document? This is not something I've heard.
Well, I mean, so much of like getting an MBA, like you go to these classes, right? And it's all very abstract. You know, they're textbooks, they're accounting textbooks, they're finance textbooks. I took some classes on entrepreneurship. You learn things, it's great. You do some case studies, it's wonderful. But when it's your money, it's a seller's financials, it's their tax returns, it's real stuff. It's numbers in a bank account at this point, you know? And I don't know if I just paid better attention to it or what it was, but like you just start going through and learning all these ins and outs of this business. Like the realization, I mean, this was almost 2 years ago now, so I'm a little bit fuzzy on the details, but like the one thing that still sticks out to me was at the time I came to realize that I would have to put almost the purchase price into this business as just working capital just to keep, you know, the trains running on time. It was a construction business, right? So you had to buy the equipment and then you had to put it in, then you had to wait 45 days to get paid, and maybe you did get paid, maybe you don't. That's kind of how construction works. And that realization alone, I was like, well, I could take my $250,000 of working capital that I'm gonna have to borrow from somebody. I could borrow that and put it in the S&P 500 and probably make 7%. You know, why would I do that? And this business is only going to net like 10%. Like you start doing those kinds of calculations, and like you don't really do those in business school. At least I didn't. I mean, maybe other people do. You know, so yeah, I would say that broker walked me through all of those thoughts. His name's Jim DeShays. Shout out to Jim DeShays. He's a great guy. He's here in Colorado. He did that for me, and it was one of the best experiences. I think it was like $2,000, something like that. Best money I've ever spent. I mean, seriously, it was outstanding.
And JD, and just to be clear, it was out this is really, I haven't heard this, like I said, so this is great. To be clear, it was so valuable because it was just the education of the exercise, or because it prevented you from doing a deal that would have been bad, or both?
I actually talked to the owner recently. So he wound up not selling and the business has gone well. I don't think it would have been a super bad deal. I think it would have been okay. But the education of basically having a professional guide you through diligence, like even a business broker guiding you through due diligence, and he was not like the seller's broker, right? Totally independent third party. This guy that does this day in, day out all the time guided me through due diligence. I don't know. It taught me a whole lot. I mean, I was working with a lawyer as well. It was kind of like a practice round of due diligence. That's the only way to really describe it. And I learned a lot. I'd recommend. I mean, if people have a deal that dies, just going through like the due diligence exercise. I mean, yeah, you're going to lose some money, you know, but then like the size of your deal, you might lose a lot of money, but don't lose hope. Like it's actually like the education you're getting from dead deals is shockingly good.
But the $2,500 that you spent with him was just kind of obviously that's not a full due diligence.
No,
that's not full due diligence. That's not quality of earnings. All of that, which is much pricier. So it was just kind of an abbreviated kind of due diligence, or did you just call it like a valuation? You just said, here's the data room. Here's all the information about this business. Give me what you think the valuation is, and then he comes back with a report.
That's exactly what he did. Yes, I gave him all the stuff that was provided to me. He produced his own independent opinion of the business value, and we went from there. Okay.
Well, don't mean to beat this to death, but as you said, it was more valuable than your MBA, so it's worth exploring.
Shockingly valuable. Yeah, I mean, it's like the world's greatest case study. You know.
Yeah. Great. All right, carry on, JD. So you don't do that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a dead deal. So up to this point, I was still working full time for TK Elevator.
So you're working full time. How much time are you giving to your search? Is it? I guess a part-time search, I guess. But how much time?
I'd say it was 20 hours a week. Working a 40-hour week on top of that. So I mean, I was staying busy. I mean, the beauty of my job with TK was that I was able, it was like a outside supervisor type of role, right? So I'm not going to an office every day. I would go into the office to for meetings and stuff like that. But I definitely started and ended my day at the house, right? So I'd be done by 4:30 or 5, and I'd spend an extra couple hours every single night working on this, and then typically a good bit of work on Saturdays as well.
Okay.
Definitely something I'd recommend, right? People that just quit their jobs and have no money coming in while they're doing the search, that puts a lot of pressure on you. Maybe you make a bad decision. I mean, I still had a family to support and stuff like that. So at this point, this was November of 21. I still thought this deal was going to go through. So I told my boss what I was planning to do at this point. and then the deal dies, It's announced and here wow, this is sorry, Greg, can I keep working for a little bit longer? And to that company's great credit, to my boss's great credit, that they let me keep working. And I said, listen, I'll give you 6 or 8 weeks notice before I quit, And so they were super on board with it. It worked out very well.
Oh, that's great.
So kept on going, had a couple other deals that LOIs on, thought for sure this was going to happen, and then it didn't happen. So I don't know if I smelled bad or what it was, but I could not get a deal to save my life at that point. And so come around February of 22, I just said, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to write one LOI a week. Every business has a value. I'm going to put that value on paper. And I'd gotten really good at writing LOIs at this point. So I decided I'm going to write one LOI a week. And I did that for 4 to 6 weeks. You'd find a business, the list price would be X. I thought it was worth 2/3 of X, so I'd send an offer over. And of course, it didn't really go through, right? But I was doing a site visit pretty much every single week. I'd get back from the site visit. I'd sit down, decide what I thought it was worth, write an LOI, and see what happened. That got me.
JD, your decision to do this was just to increase your shots on goal because numbers game, and eventually you're missing. So if you could just increase your volume, you'll accelerate the time to actually hitting something. I assume it's that, but at the same time, it sounds like you're kind of lowballing. So lowballing would reduce your chances that any individual of one of these deals would work out. So what was the logic in being I'm going to go one a week, rain or shine?
Well, it's definitely trying to get at bats. That's definitely like shots on goal, hockey term, baseball term, whatever, right? Definitely trying to get at bats here. Just getting in the reps, I think, was part of it more than anything else. You see these businesses, you start hearing, and we all kind of know how brokers are. We start hearing the same stories out of brokers and stuff like that. And so there was definitely just trying to get at bats here, but also too you say lowballing. Anybody out there that gets a list of businesses from brokers, they kind of know some of these things are overvalued,
Sure.
And I think I saw a statistic once too that said that something like half or even more of the businesses that get listed with brokers never sell.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I'm not sure the exact number, but it's somewhere in that range, right? The idea of lowballing, in my opinion, I was writing offers for what I thought was a fair value of the business. Call it lowballing, call it what you will, right? But I was definitely not walking in and say, hey, give it to me for free and give me all the AR and I'll do something with it and good luck. No, that was not the case. These were real deals. This was, 2 to 3x, 2 to 3x SDE. This was what I thought was fair.
Okay. So lowballing, I would not call it lowballing.
This was definitely not term. Craigslist. I've done that to a few businesses, but this was not that, Okay. So that got me into a company. They were a residential electrical contractor here in Northern Colorado. Great guys, run by two brothers. I think they recently sold, but I'll still keep their name quiet. Great company, great guys, great part of town. Would have been just phenomenal, right? And we had a handshake deal. I went and met with them at their warehouse on a Tuesday night in the dark, the whole thing, trying to, keep it quiet from their employees. And we had a handshake deal. It said, hey, everything looks good. but like they wouldn't sign the LOI. And like having gotten burned on a lot of these deals, thinking I had this thing in the bag, I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to keep looking, And I told the broker, hey, I'm going to keep looking, and see what I can find. And like the broker was, trying to get them to sign, and they were trying to do something to like move all the assets into a trust. I don't know. They was doing something weird, just for tax purposes, not anything unsavory, but tax stuff.
Yeah.
Right? These were two accountants that had become electricians, or I think one was an accountant or something like that. I'm not sure. Regardless, I kept looking. So on a lark, I said, hey, look, there's this plumbing company up in Estes Park, Colorado. Sure, I'll take the drive up there on a Friday. It's a beautiful drive, but I couldn't imagine this working out. It's a good bit smaller than what I'm looking at. But yeah, why not? So I drove up there. And
how far is Estes Park from Denver, or from wherever you live?
From where I was living at the time, it was about 90 minutes.
Okay.
So a little too far away for what I would have liked, a little bit too small, was mostly plumbing, no HVAC. It was definitely, like everything was close, but not quite there.
Okay.
For what I was looking for. And
JD,
hey,
before we get into learn more about this business, I want to make sure we also hear you talk about franchising, which you almost did. You got interested in doing a franchise and then decided against it. Is this the moment to tell us about that?
Sure, I can talk about the franchises. So, I did, around that same time, like January, February of 22, started looking at franchises as well. If you're trying to write one LOI a week, you can kind of cheat a little bit and throw a franchise or two in there, and so definitely there's something there with franchise. I did not wind up doing it, and kind of my ultimate decision was I was going to pay roughly the same amount of money or take on roughly the same amount of debt to have no revenue. And that bothered me. Like I don't have a sales background. I didn't at the time. And the idea of just spending $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, whatever it was going to be, to then have this manual of operations and no revenue and some support, I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but it concerned me a little bit. And so I was definitely leaning more towards if I could find a business that I would like to buy, I'd rather do that. But if I couldn't, I wanted to get in the game regardless, and it was kind of like the last resort.
Okay. And to be clear, we're talking about doing a de novo or a new territory or a new location.
Brand new territory franchise. I looked at some cleaning franchises, which actually were really interesting. They have a very unique model of master franchising where you kind of like get like some people in and like you sub-franchise a small territory to them. So you would have owned like all of Denver or something like that. And like you would sell some small territory. And it's like these guys would be like their own cleaning business owners, and they'd pick up whatever you could sell in that area. There was a plumbing and HVAC franchise that I really liked. I actually went to their discovery day. It's the same group that does Pop-A-Lock. They had 2 years ago, this like plumbing and HVAC franchise they were working on. I don't know if it's still out there. It seems to maybe kind of died off. But I went to their franchise discovery day down in Louisiana. It was great. Great people. I think it's a really good idea what they've got worked out. There were a couple other franchises I looked at too.
Well, if you were open to franchising, although you ultimately decided it was kind of your last resort, but if you were open to it, then you certainly would have been open to buying an existing franchise resale. So like ETA crossed with franchising. Did you see any of those businesses, existing franchises that were ongoing concerns that you could buy?
Anything that was through brokers, they were out there, they were for sale. There was always some kind of distressed element to it. Like it wasn't producing enough revenue or something like that. I'm sure if you could like get to the franchise group, you could probably find a really good deal, especially if you were not geographically constrained. I think they would probably be a really great deal in that. But that would be the way you'd have to go. You'd have to go to the franchise group, get in with them, convince them that you're a good buyer, and then they'd have to find a guy that was trying to sell. Yep.
Which, by the way, audience, is exactly what Michael Horowitz, who did the Wingstop, bought a bunch of Wingstops
interesting,
at a slug, and then proceeded to buy more and do some de novo development. But that's exactly what he did. He basically did a lot of business development, outreach to franchisors, and eventually got in with some marquee franchisors, and they brought him a deal. So I digress. Go ahead, JD. Okay, so thank you for telling us about your thoughts on franchising. Now back to the plumbing business in Estes Park.
So I make the beautiful drive up to Estes Park, which if you're not familiar with Colorado, this is the gateway to Rocky Mountain National Park. So pretty much every national park, they always have some town like right outside the gate. You go to Bryce or you go to Moab or wherever. There's always some little town right outside the gate, where it has like some reasonable accommodation, some restaurants, that kind of stuff. So that is Estes Park for Rocky Mountain National Park. I drive up the canyon, go up there. I'm thinking, it's a total waste of time. Meet with the broker. We walk in. It's, kind of a rundown building up in Estes Park. There's like an auto place behind with a bunch of defunct cars. There's, it's messy for sure. But I walk in and
sounds like a small business.
Yeah, man. So I walk in there and like stuff just started clicking in a weirdly good way, right? So one, the first thing that was very different about it was the owner had told all of his employees this was the plan. He had been trying to sell it for 3 years. I don't think he'd been trying very hard because he started in 2019. Actually, he started with Jim Deshays, the broker that I mentioned earlier. And so he had started in 2019 and then COVID happened. And so I think he just kind of like thought the world was ending, got really worried about COVID and just kind of like circled the wagons, right? And it turns out it wound up being one of his best years, like probably most small businesses. Like Q1 that year was terrible and everything after that was great.
Home services, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe not everybody, but home services for sure,
Yeah.
And then so all the employees knew about this. And in fact, several employees had tried to buy the company, I can't tell quite how serious, but a few of the employees had tried to buy the company. They were unsuccessful I think they just didn't really know how to do it. And I think they didn't really try super hard, which like there's no shade on them. Right. Then there was real estate that could be a part of the transaction. He was very upfront about that. And then like the owner was a very elderly man and he was clearly not super involved. He was still involved in the business, but he was not like the linchpin to the business, which is something I was really looking for. And anybody that's still searching, like try to find an owner that's almost bad at what he does. Like I would not say Gary was bad at what he was doing, but like he was not like this guy that was like super involved in the business. And like he was gone for large stretches. He was a bit older. He was in his 70s. He wasn't in the greatest of health. And so it was clear that like he was, going to the doctor throughout the day or coming in late or whatever the case may be. And the business was running well enough without him. He was like, it still very much so needed an owner, but it got along fine without like this rock star A player of an owner,
JD, let me jump in with that. That's
Sure.
a great tip. And let me jump in with another way of couching that tip that I've heard. Go on to the reviews, the Google reviews of the business. We're talking home services businesses, and search the reviews for the owner's name.
That's a great way to put it.
If the owner's name comes up, it means he or she is too much of a technician, too in the business, and the business is too reliant. You want, like you just said, you want that owner's name to be as referenced as little as possible to kind of see hard evidence that they're not very in the business and that the business is carrying on without their, being super, super active. So great point. Continue, please.
The company was run like it was 1985. That's the only way really to describe it, right? So this is a pen and paper business. This is fax machines. Like the whole idea of like service contracts or membership plans, anything like that was non-existent. But they had a gun safe full of like 300 keys to people's homes in Estes Park, which if somebody gives you the key to your home, I'd say that's even better than a monthly membership or a filter change plan or something like that.
I love that. That is,
yeah.
What's better than a recurring revenue credit card plan? Well, how about the key to their house in your possession?
And then like, I go back to like all the employees knew this was going on. Like there was no surprise whatsoever. And I've been on both sides of this. Like the third business I bought, which I guess we'll get to later, none of the employees knew. And so it was, it's a very different, it's a different vibe, I guess, to borrow a term, right? So like we were going through and touring this business at like 2 p.m. on a Friday. This was not some like middle of the night, meet the owners and this clandestine meeting. Like I shook this kid Johnny's hand. He's like, "Oh, hey man, yeah, cool. If you buy this business, that'd be great."
And JD, even though there were employees at the business who'd taken a run at the business and had wanted to buy it themselves.
Yeah. I think, so like they would have been full. I think if it had gone on longer, they probably would have found some way to like seller finance the business 100%. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure if Gary would have done it either. But yeah, no, I think I'm not convinced how hard they tried to buy it, Like I know one guy that's still with me, he said, he talked to somebody about it and he like considered it, but didn't really pursue it super hard. Right. So, I mean, that was one, the woman that was the secretary, she had tried like she'd actually applied for an SBA loan, but, it was through Chase. Right. So either she didn't really know the banks that are really good at this. And then like, she hasn't got like the greatest credit or something. I'm not really sure, but, like they didn't try
they weren't
super
very
hard.
Serious.
They weren't super serious about it, whereas somebody like me, like I take the loan to like 6 lenders to look at it. Right. They went to one, they got told no and moved on, So that, and then like, we're like meeting people and talking to them and like, so one of the challenges with plumbing businesses is licensure, right? So if you're in my shoes and you're trying to buy a plumbing company, I'm not a plumber. So I have to have somebody on staff with certain license to be able to get licensed from the state, right? Well, that guy was already in place, like if you start looking at some of these other businesses, I was got to figure out some super sketchy way to, get the license or whatever. So a lot of things just kind of made sense. Nothing worked perfect, I mean, I would say if you find the perfect deal, it's probably not the greatest deal, And then like one thing that the seller said that like was really important to me, he said that like, well, hey, if you don't buy it or if it doesn't get sold, I'm gonna close the doors in a couple of months, So I mean that kind of tells me, one, like you're looking for a motivated seller, you're looking for a guy with a reasonable expectation of price. And like you're looking for a business that is not super reliant on the owner and that has a whole bunch of repeat customers, boxes checked all the way around,
Totally.
It was a little bit smaller than what I wanted. I can tell you about the numbers.
Please.
I guess now's a good enough time. Yes. At the time, they were doing about 1.2 million in revenue. So in 21, they did 1.2 million in revenue. I don't think the seller was super keyed into his financials. I don't know. I don't know him that well. We don't really talk anymore, but he got a PPP loan in 21, and I think he just saw the bank account, and the bank account looked good. He was ready to retire, and that was good enough for financials. Everything else was for tax purposes, So in 21, they did about $75,000 in SDE, which is not a lot, right? I mean, for people that are new to this, that's super small. Years prior, if you took the trailing 3-year average, it was like 135,000 in SDE. So this is a
still
small plumbing
JD.
company.
Still very
super small. And so back to the franchise thing, it kind of felt like middle ground to me. It's kind of where I landed with this one, right? So franchise, you got no revenue. Whereas if you go out and you do like the true search fund thing, pay, 4 or 5 times EBITDA or whatever your multiple is, that's some multi-million-dollar deal. This was right in the middle, right? Like we had gone from 0 to 1. We had proven that the company works. I had an owner that worked out of the office. He was not a field technician. It was, meeting the criteria, but barely.
But JD, so we talk about buying big, buying small, and I'm sure I want to hear your thoughts on that directly. Sure. But just one, so buying big, buying small, one of the big things is, buying larger is a less fragile business and, more cash coming off it to reinvest in the business, et cetera. The audience will have heard people say that, us talk about this many times. And buying small, therefore, more fragile, less cash to reinvest, and so on. But I would guess there'd be a floor on just how small you'd go, which would mean covering your own living expenses. So if the true SDE of this business you estimated at $75,000, and let's say your loan, your SBA loan, if that's how you choose to go, is going to eat up half of that, which is a rough way to think about it. That's $40,000 you're going to be able to pay yourself without having any left over for working capital, incidentals, rainy day, cushion, etc. So you must have been thinking that you were going to live off savings for a while, or what? Because 40 grand ain't enough to live on in Denver. And like I said, that's not leaving any room for anything else.
No. So I think they just had like a poorly managed 2021 was kind of what I told myself. I thought that, hey, 135 is the number. And there were some other metrics too that I looked at, right? So like at the time, their average ticket, which I don't measure average ticket the same way, so it might not be comparing apples to apples, but it's close, right? Their average ticket was like $300, $330, I think it was, which if you know anything about plumbing and HVAC companies, that's abysmally low. And so I didn't know that much about plumbing and HVAC companies at the time, but I definitely knew, hey, $330, I can walk in here and raise my prices 10%, and we're good. There shouldn't be any problems. And then I was living very, very, very frugally looking back at it. So we were living in a 900 square foot house, my wife and I, 2 kids, 2 dogs.
Wow.
We were in Denver, something we had bought, a few years ago. So we were living very affordably looking back at it. And I kind of penciled out the numbers and I thought, okay, I can basically replace the money I've been living on, because through elevators, I was a very aggressive saver and saved all my bonuses and anything on top of that I possibly could. And I could basically roughly replace my take-home pay with this business, because business is a bit more tax advantage and stuff like that too. So the math, and I was ready to go. And honestly, I'll tell anybody that's searching still, like, half of the battle is just getting in and not screwing up. That's kind of where I landed on this thing was, man, I have just got to get in there. If I can just get in the game, I can do something with this. And I wrote an LOI.
JD, but before we leave the math that mathed. So with the 75 SDE, that was a down year. You basically predicted you could raise prices 10%, which would all fall to the bottom line. Although you're going to have J curves, so you're going to have new money that you need to infuse the business with. So it's not really going to fall to the bottom line. But you thought that was going to cover your living expenses. 75,000 SDE minus your loan payment and everything you were able to support 2 dogs, 2 kids, a wife.
The number I was working with was 135 SDE. 75 was their last year. I was assuming we had one bad year. So I was taking the trailing 3 years average and saying that this would work for me.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm focused on the S75. I should be focused on the 135. Okay. And then just a thing about the health of the business, or the quality of the business. 135, now looking at the correct number, of over 1.2 million is margins of just 10%.
It's bad.
11%.
Yeah.
You saw that, I guess, probably as opportunity, not as a reason to walk away. You saw that is actually a positive even.
Yes.
Okay.
100%. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I mean, I actually almost think it's kind of to its credit, right? Because it means that it stayed alive with like the level of involvement that the owner had.
So can you tell us what you paid for this 135 roughly SDE business?
I paid $800, and that included the real estate. So the business itself, the business assets were $350, and then the real estate was $450.
So if the real estate was more than half of the value of the entire package, then did you get a 25-year amortization on the SBA loan?
That is an astute observation, Will. Yes, I did, which actually made this all that much more of an attractive deal to me. So my debt service, especially at the time, because rates were so low, was trivial. I mean, it was nothing. I think I was paying like $3 or $4 grand a month. It was absurdly low.
And that factors into your risk assessment of this overall venture. So you're 3 or 4. That's a low loan payment. You just feel like you can absorb it. Like even if things don't go well, that's low enough that they're not going to come for your house, sort of thing.
Yes, yeah. Well, and then you've got real estate to secure the loan. I picked up a bunch of vehicles, a bunch of assets. I actually felt like whenever I closed the deal that I like my balance sheet actually went up about $100,000 because like there were so many hard assets in the deal, right? I mean, at the time, used vehicles were very expensive and in a sense different, but like I got all these vehicles at this super great price. I got this real estate at like a pretty fair price, I would say. And then like there were tools, there was some other stuff. If you wanted to put like a number on the customer list, you could. But honestly, I felt like the day I closed, between like the cash infusion from the bank, a line of credit that was available that I didn't draw on, and all the hard assets, I actually felt like I was more than solvent. Which is another thing I would recommend, right? Like for your first business, it's all about risk. I would say it's actually not about buying something that's like super attractive on like the EBITDA side. It's about risk, right? Because the last thing you want to do is walk into your first business and then bankrupt yourself 6 months in, which does seem to happen to some people, and a business like this, I mean, positive on the balance sheet, or at least that's how I felt. I might have been a little bit off, but it's close, super low debt service, 25-year amortization of the loan. What's not to like? The only thing I didn't like was the commute.
Yeah. And it also sounds like, so if the business was valued at 350 and you're working off an SDE that's 135, so you were paying less than 3x.
Yeah, I think it's like 2.5, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which again, for these smaller businesses, that's what makes them so attractive, is that multiple is your risk. It's a good metric for risk, right? The higher that multiple gets, the more risky this is. Like I was listening to Nick Patrick's podcast a few weeks ago, and I think he paid something like 1x. I mean, it was something super low, and hey, it worked out great for that guy. Find a way to get a low multiple, man, and go from there.
Nick Patrick, to remind the audience, was a guest probably 2 or so months ago. His episode aired, and also in Estes Park, the events business in Estes Park. And yeah, got a great deal and exited I think in 19 months, he made almost $1 million for himself, I think was the number.
Super small world. He was customer number 4, I believe, for me. Well, the guy that owned the building he was in, but still, I like texted him like day one. I was like, hey, we got to do a backflow.
Oh, that's great. That's so great. And I'll also just point out, JD, that your seller didn't maybe do the best job of negotiating when he tells you that if you don't buy it, he's just going to shut it down. So any dollar he gets from you is more than he'll otherwise get. So that's a pretty strong negotiating position to start from for you.
Yeah, Gary's a good guy. No hard feelings to Gary, but yeah, he was ready to be done, man. I mean, I think he was 70, 72, something like that. He's got this plumbing company he's dealing with up in Estes Park. He didn't live up there. He was living 45 minutes away and driving up there all the time. I get it,
Yeah, I do too. And okay, and how many employees did it have?
7 was the starting number. 7 original employees.
Okay, well, have we said everything that you want to say about buying super small in this case, JD, or was there anything you wanted to add?
Can't recommend it enough. Everybody should do it.
And point again, just to crystallize, getting in the game and basically low risk in the sense that your financial obligations are so much lower. It'll probably sell for a lower multiple. So kind of financially less risky. Of course, it's also probably a more fragile business. So while it has worked out well for you, let's not assume that every tiny business or business with low SDE is one that you can do great things with. Sometimes they are going to be bad quality businesses. So, right?
Very well put, Will. Yeah, I mean, you are kind of effectively buying yourself a job. It's definitely not following the playbook out of like the Harvard Business Review books or anything else that's out there. But that's not to say it's not something that's not worth doing. It's worked out very well for me. But just realize you've got to show up with your big boy pants on and plan to grow this thing. But a lot of these things, they've been lifestyle businesses for the owners. The owners have not pushed them super hard, and if you walk in with some grit and some ambition, you really could double or triple these businesses. I mean, I think Nick doubled his revenue, right? So a very similarly sized business at a very similar area. So no reason that you can't do it, but do just realize that if it's super owner reliant or there's a myriad of other reasons not to do it, then maybe stay away.
Colorful stories to come, JD, I hope.
Sure. Let's share them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's just get into a little bit of the nitty gritty first, post acquisition. So you get in there, this ticket price and your almost quadrupling of it is a big part of how you have added value and did so quickly. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. I mean, so the common advice is to not really do anything for the first 6 months. And I followed that 100%. I let the company largely run the way it had been run. Like previous, we just kind of stepped in and didn't want to say much, even like kind of quietly went to my office, listened to what everybody was doing, rode along with a couple of the key technicians, met some customers, that kind of thing. We had some really good work in the pipeline that Gary had like just handed me. Again, thank you so much, Gary. Some of this stuff, like there was a very large ticket job that was already bid. They had been going back and forth for years. Well, it closed like month 3. And we got 50% down. And then we were so slow at the time, not slow on work, but like just slow to execute, that I got to like keep this 50,000, or it was some absurd amount of money that I got to just keep in the checking account. Right. So a great working capital infusion in like month 3. It was awesome. So we just kind of went with the way it had been going, but there were definitely some things that from Jump Street I could see that needed to change. One, like there was no dispatching or scheduling system whatsoever. It was all pen and paper, fax machines, run out of Estes Park, like the way we used to dispatch. Anybody that's in the industry. So I will share this for the benefit of those that are in the industry for how interesting it can be. So I'm a pretty fastidious guy. I like things to be organized and scheduled and planned. That was not what was going on in this company. So the way they used to like schedule things, like the girl at the front, she'd take your phone call whenever you called in to have your toilet fixed or whatever. There was no schedule. Like there was just like 3 paper sorters with 7 slots, one for each day of the week, Monday through Sunday, out 3 weeks. Right. And there wasn't like a calendar or anything like that. She just kind of looked at him and said, I think Tuesday looks empty. How about we schedule you for Tuesday? And so she would she would then write down the details of your job, make you a carbon paper job ticket. Like literally it was, like the old school yellow carbon paper behind it. And it was all Estes Park. So like there weren't even zip codes or cities in the address. It was like 453 Riverside. and then like the phone numbers were often 4-digit phone numbers, because like everybody's landline in Estes Park is 970-586 and then your 4 digits, right? So
wow.
So this was like I don't know.
Jenny, I think it's old school. If you'll go to some place that's maybe underpopulated or less populated and you see a 7-digit phone number, right? Like they haven't yet added the area codes. This is going back to like
4-digit phone
the 50s.
Numbers. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. No email addresses, nothing like that, and then, so she would take your carbon paper one, she'd stick it in the slot for Tuesday, right? So then Tuesday rolls around. The first guy into the shop grabs all the Tuesday tickets out, walks into my office. There's a whole bunch of like chip clips on like the wall, right? Like there's 8 chip clips. I still have them. And they would just stick them all up there. There was no time of day, no nothing. It was just, we're going to get to you when we get to you, And then there'd be a whole bunch of tickets from the day prior that we just didn't get to or whatever, because why? Who needs to schedule things? And then like the guys would just come in. They grabbed 1 ticket at a time. They grabbed whichever ticket they felt like getting. There was no like, this ticket's more priority. There was a little bit of that, but not much, and then they would hop in their trucks and drive out to the job, figure out what they needed to get for the job, drive back to the shop where all the inventory was, pick up whatever. And like they carried like a pretty minimal amount of like copper fittings and stuff on their trucks, but it was pretty minimal compared to where we are now, and they would drive back out, do the job, drive back to the shop, fill out the job ticket. They'd say, I spent 2 hours at this job, and then so-and-so was with me for an hour. I used 5 3/4 copper 90s and 6 unions or whatever, and an expansion tank or whatever they felt like putting down on there. And they'd stick it in the thing. Tuesdays and Thursdays, the girl up front would take everything out of the bin and like mail out invoices. Like we mailed invoices to people. And then the good people of Estes Park paid us whenever they felt like it, put a check in the mail, and maybe we got paid, maybe we didn't. That was the state of this company.
Wow.
It was. So it's a working
It's easy
capital.
to laugh at, but there's so much meat on the bone here for you to just sink your teeth into. Yeah.
So much, right? So
yeah.
And so like the working capital was a disaster. We were like if you bought a new furnace from us, like we were 6 weeks out. We did one furnace a week, and that's all we could handle. Which I don't know if you know about the business. So now, actually, a few weeks ago, we sold a furnace Friday at noon and had it put in Friday before 5. So I mean, we've just gone so much further, and then just like the cash conversion cycle off that of like we get paid then versus waiting 6 weeks to do these furnaces, and then you'd buy this inventory and it would sit in the back of your shop waiting for the job for 6 weeks, and so then you pay for it. It was a working capital nightmare. It was a revenue per technician nightmare, but we had the trust of the people of Estes Park. We had a great market to work in, and so you got something to start with, right? I guess you wanted to hear about like colorful technician stories, right? So my favorite one. So I had a key technician whose name will remain nameless, but let's just say there were some substance abuse problems up in Estes Park. I don't know what it is about that town, but there's a lot of people who have some substance abuse problems, and a few of my employees were one of them. And one of these guys came in the day after Labor Day and vomited in a customer's sink because he was so still drunk or hungover. I don't know. Calls me to tell me about it like it's no big deal. He's like, "Hey, he didn't seem to think it was a big deal, right?" He's like, "Hey, JD, I threw up at so-and-so's sink," and I'm like, "Go home." Come in. And I mean, like, I had people who would call in sick for quote unquote food poisoning one day a week. I mean, it was just. That was the culture up there, And,
well, that's the question, JD. So you have, we're talking about kind of the ingredients of the business here, the raw ingredients, which seem like that you could do a lot with it. But what about the people, the talent, and that the picture you're painting now sounds like maybe not so strong.
Well, I guess I'll go back to like one of like the key values of this company is that they were able to run revenue and make money in this market with what they had, right? So given what you had, might not have been the greatest. It might not have been like the most professionally run operation. It still made money, and there's a lot to improve there. To your point, there's a lot of meat on the bone, as you say. But yeah, so one of the first challenges I realized was hiring people, right? There's not a whole lot of expert technicians up in Estes Park. Not a whole lot of expert office people in that area as well. It's a town. We had I think there's 6,000 homes in the whole thing, and half of them are only occupied half of the year. So it's not a huge market, but
and it being a kind of national park entry town, I assume it's also not part of really a larger city. I mean, it's kind of an island. So
yeah, very much so.
6,000 homes is your whole market, sort of thing.
But I came to realize a couple of things that most, if not all of my technicians, and frankly, all the better ones, were living down the mountain. They were living, so about 45 minutes down the canyon is, there's two towns. You can go northeast out of there and you go to Loveland, or you can go southeast and you go to Longmont. I don't know if you're familiar with Colorado geography here, but so those are real towns, and most of my technicians were living in those towns and then commuting up the hill. So that kind of probably 3 months in, I'd throw up like an Indeed ad or something like that to see if I could get people interested. And you'd get absolutely nobody would apply for these jobs if you listed your address as Estes Park. I did a little experiment. I listed my address as Loveland, and I had a flood of applicants. I mean, like scores, dozens, tons of them, right? And I'm like, all right, so we've got to probably move this thing down the hill, which means we have to expand. So Loveland is 45 minutes down the canyon, and there's 60,000 people in each zip code, and it's it's a normal suburb, right?
Yeah.
It's a normal sized town. So, after my, first 6 months of not really doing much, the only thing we really did differently for the first 6 months, I got a little bit more aggressive bidding jobs. I think in the past they just weren't really like, if there was somebody that asked for a furnace change out or whatever, there was no real huge push to go out there and bid the job super quick or get, proposed. I mean, it was there. They were bidding jobs. I don't want to say they weren't bidding jobs, but they weren't bidding jobs with a huge sense of urgency,
Mm-hmm.
And then, and then we got very fortunate with that one really big ticket. So with that said, I mean, I was able to take a company that was doing 1.2 million a year. We did like $1 million in revenue in my first 6 months. So just showing up, and I did raise our hourly rate a little bit. I did increase our markup on parts and material a little bit. And then just being a bit more aggressive going after jobs, I started bidding jobs that were down in Loveland just to kind of see what was out there, and had some success early on, and got a couple of jobs in the books, and it started going great. So about 6 months in, I kind of sat down and took an assessment of the business, and looked at things that were holding us back, right? And so I guess if I had to think about it, one was people. If you're going to grow this company, you have to have access to talent. Two is access to customers. Like the town of Estes Park's a great place. I love the good people up there, but it's only 6,000 homes, right?
Yep.
And then some like office organization and pricing were the other things that the whole idea of billing somebody time and material still to this day. I mean, like there's an art to doing that. You can do it. I don't want to talk bad about any company that does that, but I don't personally like that for residential customers. I like to be able to give the people a price up front, and then kind of like the standard industry move of like, here's your 3 options or whatever. That always, set a lot better with me, right? Because the customer is not getting a surprise bill, and then you're not arguing over, wow, why is this $125 an hour? I mean, you guys, you get those kind of conversations, right? Just one price, we all agree on it, we move forward. So with that
JD,
in mind,
so to be clear, the 2 pricing models are flat fee up front. You give the customer 3 options for a flat fee to get the job done. No surprises, understood at the outset of the job, at the beginning of the job that they agreed to. That's what you prefer, versus time and materials, where they only know what it's going to cost after the job is done, when the necessary materials have been added up and the time has been added up, and then they see a price and there's surprise to it, and they also see the hourly number, which they might get in their head about, right? And that's option number 2. And it sounds like that's the kind of the more popular, the kind of quote best practice way to do it in the industry, but not what you prefer.
I don't know. I mean, I think that I'm not quite sure what the preferred method is. I mean, I'd say in the residential world, the flat fee seems to be much more popular, but there's plenty of companies that still do time material, I mean,
that's the old school way to do it. Okay.
Yeah, I would call that much more of an old school way of doing things. And then commercial customers definitely prefer the time material. Like they want to see a labor and material breakout. But commercial customers also, they're just different, and like they're not bothered by a billing rate of whatever it needs to be, right? Like back in elevators, we used to bill, I think service is in like the $400 or $500 an hour range. I mean, it's like that number is crazy, right? Like plumbing and HVAC, you're going to be 200-ish is probably a pretty decent market rate right now, depending on where you are. But whenever you're flat rating it, there's a lot more thought that has to go into your pricing, and like you have to build out a price book and all this stuff. But I don't know. It just sits better to me when you can walk in. It feels much more professional to me when I can walk into a customer's house and say, hey, we should do X, Y, and Z to your home. Here's the price for each one of these things. Now, if you really want to go up from there, we can add the following, or if you want to save a little bit of money, we can talk about saving it this way,
Yeah.
For a residential customer, I think it just makes a lot more sense to give them, like you talk about price one time and it's done, they sign, and you go do the work. It's just much better.
Okay.
So great. The things that I saw kind of holding us back, right? Like I said, it was access to customers, it was access to talent, and like some kind of like more of a office efficiency, I guess is the way you would put that. Like and that's more on like the customer service side of things more than anything else. So what do we do? Well, I go lease a space down in Loveland, and we kind of slowly start moving our operations there. I get in. There's all these groups there's all these groups in like the home service industry where they'll help you with your pricing. Like Nexstar is one of them, right? They'll help you with pricing and business options and all that kind of stuff. I signed up with a company called the New Flat Rate, and I mean, if you're a plumbing and HVAC company and you're starting to make this transition, they are phenomenal. Like they're really going to help you out. I think they're a really great way if you have no background whatsoever and then you are trying to jump feet first into this. It's a little bit weird. It's a little bit goofy, but like once you kind of learn how it works out very well. We did that. We got the Loveland shop, and then I rolled out Service Titan as well, which is more of a standard dispatching software for the industry. So now we've actually got like a way to schedule crews. I did all this training with these guys on these flat rate models. We started moving things down to Loveland, and what happens? Everybody quits. And it was because it was such a change. It's a radically different company. I mean, I can't say I blame any of the guys that did wind up leaving for leaving. It's, everything changed and it was totally different. So
it's interesting, JD, that you were really cautious in your first 6 months, a devotee of no change for 6 months. And then you were eager to make changes and did so. And so it's almost like, unfortunately, you weren't rewarded for those 6 months. You may as well have just started making changes because the end result was the same. Now, you didn't know that looking forward, but looking back, it's kind of that way. How do you reflect on no change, lots of change, and then losing people? Would you do it differently?
No, I wouldn't.
No.
I would have taken the 6 months, and the reason is you just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
I might have even taken a year, honestly, looking back
really?
at it. I think like there's so many. Granted, that's probably one of the struggles to buying a smaller business. Like the systems aren't really there, right? And I came from a corporate America background where we had these wonderful reports, and you could easily see the status of your business, and you got financial statements by the 15th every month. That exists in the small business world, but like you have to do it, or somebody, like you have to pay for it or something, right? Like these things don't just magically happen. And I think I probably would have liked to have understood the business from a financial perspective better and maybe focused on like our cash conversion cycle or some other low-hanging fruit at first. But at the same time, like there were some people that were not in good roles for themselves, who need to leave the business for the business to grow, right? And so that's part of that everybody quitting. So out of those 7 original employees, only 2 stuck around. And did
the vomiter stay?
No, they did not. Yeah.
Okay.
So they so 2 stuck around, and actually they're 2 of my best employees to this day. They're both still here. One of the guys that left and then came back once he kind of like we went through like the wandering in the desert of figuring out this new business model without him. And then once he kind of got squared away, like he remained friends with one of the 2 guys that stuck around. And once he got squared away, I think he kind of saw how good it can be. And he wound up coming back, and he's with me now. He's a great employee as well. I'm sitting here watching him move through the dispatch board right now,
JD, let me indulge me an observation here, which I feel like is a pattern that I've now been bringing up on recent episodes because I'm seeing it, which is kind of what you just described, where typically in a blue-collar business, local blue-collar business, where the new owner, you in this case, start making changes, good changes, the word travels in the community of the technicians. So in your case, it was a former employee, so he's pretty close to the business. He's got buddies still in the business. But maybe word travels anyway, or even outside that little nucleus, and you start getting people who want to work for you because you're developing a reputation among technicians in your local market that the new owner is doing good things. This is a healthy, growing, exciting place to work. Am I overstating it, or do you feel like there's some of that phenomenon at play?
100% it's true. Once you start getting a good reputation out there, you can start attracting good talent. But it also kind of cuts the other way too. So if you have the wrong reputation, you'll attract the wrong talent. Just keep that in mind. But like the culture that you have attracts people, And if you set the culture for what you want it to be, you'll attract the people you want. They're out there, when we were, the old Mountain Valley, we attracted a few technicians who I'm glad I didn't hire them. Let's just leave it at that.
All right. And JD, forgive me if I missed it, but your average ticket going from 330 to 1200, did you address that, or is basically all these things that we've been talking about, all these factors contributed to that?
Yeah. So I guess let's kind of talk about the things I've done since January of 22, right? So I brought in this technician as a general manager type, who actually went to Estes Park on a lark as well. Like, he had no intention of taking the job. He already had another job lined up, he told me. And he came up there and he met me and he kind of realized like what I was about, which was, growing a pretty big company. And I think he saw some potential there and decided he wanted to be a part of a company from the ground up. And he's been with me for a year now. And he's been a big part of this change, right? So I set the standard here, set the flat rate model, the whole thing. We started bringing in some new technicians. And so Q1 of 22 was pretty rough, right? Like, we were trying to find people. We were desperately hiring some people. We made some bad hires, made some great ones too. But honestly, I feel like you make about 1 to 2 bad hires for every 1 to 2 good hires, right? It's
painful. That's expensive.
50%.
It
was super painful, right? Like, I had this guy who like threatened me physically. I think he had some like gang affiliation, like, you name it, man. I've seen it, dude. Like, I've run through some guys that just, it was bad. It was really bad.
Well, JD, hold on a second here.
Sure.
I mean, you say it with a smile, you say it kind of nonchalant, but these are the horror stories that really scare people about small business. Are you saying it kind of, breezily because it's in the past and it's funny to laugh about now? I mean, or are you just thicker skinned or what? Because that one story might scare off a lot of people listening to this.
Yeah, it's not for the weak or the faint of heart. Yeah, you get thick skin, that's for sure, and like, you get really good at sussing out the guys that are problems and getting rid of them quickly. I mean, a lot of times, like, whenever you like sitting there in the interview with a technician, he's the greatest technician ever, you're the greatest boss ever, and then you guys start working together and it's a different story. So I went from that guy that has some, like, I'm pretty sure some kind of like weak Mexican gang affiliation who, like, told me he was going to beat the F out of me, like, whenever I fired him, after I think he stole $1,000 or $2,000 on the company credit card, like, tried to steal some vehicles. It was, all the things you would expect, right?
All the things you would expect. This is what you're telling the audience to expect, JD. Uh-oh.
You're gonna hire some people, right? Like, it's gonna be a thing, right? Just be prepared for it and learn from my mistakes and get rid of them more quickly. So
your mistake. Wait, hold on a second. There, your mistake was you actually didn't take because I'm getting the impression of a boss who's can handle it. I mean, you seem like you're kind of like not that scared off by these situations, but in fact, you felt like you were a little maybe soft or too patient with some of these characters and let them stick around too long.
Oh yeah, 100%. Especially then, I've gotten better about it. Like that guy stuck around for way too long. I mean, he was probably with me for 2 or 3 months. He should have been gone like maybe a month in, frankly. But I mean, you're so desperate for people because, like, you've decided to like rebuild this company from the ground up. The customers haven't gone anywhere. They're still there. They still want what they want. Yep. You've got to find labor to staff it at this point. So, I mean, it's, that can be a struggle to find. But I mean, I will say, like, we had another guy come in who, like, he interviewed great. He had done well, had a good resume, total meth head, right? Like, but hey, I was able to get rid of him very quickly. He only lasted a week at the company whenever we realized, like, there's some telltale signs of that, and like, whenever I saw those, I was like, oh yeah, buddy, you need to go right now. So, I mean, you get better at picking this stuff up, but I don't know. I mean, it's maybe some of your guests have it from day zero. I did not.
Have what from day zero?
the ability to like find the right people, fire the wrong ones, move guys through, I listen to some of your guests and they seem to be able to do it much better than me, but like it took me, 6-12 months to get to the point where I, would fire the people that need to be fired quickly. And even to this day, like I definitely keep people around way longer than I probably should, I don't know. I mean, I've got thoughts on that. I actually think it makes a lot of sense to like give people, if you've got a talented technician who has done something dumb, for whatever reason, like, there's not much sense in firing talent if the dumb thing, I mean, drugs are a different story, right? But like, if the guy can't fill out service tickets or, some kind of administrative thing, right? Like, okay, you got a talented plumber here who needs some help. You would do better to help him, write him up, try to improve whatever it is you're missing out on, because talented plumbers are hard to find. They're not everywhere, right? So I don't know. I mean, like people say like fire fast, hire slow and fire fast is right. The thing. I kind of think the other way. I mean, it depends on what it is, right? Like if it's a CSR or somebody in a management role, that's a different story. But if it's a technician and they're talented, they're good at the technician stuff, but they struggle maybe on the sales side or whatever it is, I would rather develop them at the risk of maybe they don't ever catch on, versus
because their skills are so precious, so hard to find.
Yeah. I can teach you how to sell. I can teach you stuff like that, but finding a guy with 10 years of plumbing experience, it takes 10 years to find that, like to get that experience, right? So let's see if we can't teach him everything else or find a spot in the organization where he fits better.
Great, JD. Well, listen, we're bumping up on time, and I want to have some time for kind of zooming out, kind of big picture themes here. But there are just a few more things to the plot. Namely, you did a couple more acquisitions. Give us just a couple minutes on each of those, and then tell us what the enterprise looks like today in terms of numbers.
Yeah, sure. So we, so part of that move to Loveland, I purchased a small one-man plumbing outfit in Severance, Colorado, which is a little bit east of I-25, so a little bit further out on the plains, and not too far. It's still very much so Front Range, Colorado. Did that to kind of give us like a jump start, right? It worked out very well. That was a totally seller finance deal for about $90,000. We're making the last payment on that here June 1st.
So a one-man business, JD? So is that what they'd call in tech land like an acqui-hire? I mean, what does it mean to buy a one-man business? It was a
name and a phone number. Name and a phone number.
Okay, yep. But and the guy comes with you. He joins
no, the guy did not. So it was a name and a phone number and a Google business profile. And I don't know. I mean, I probably could have gotten it for a little bit less money. I wouldn't call it the greatest deal ever, but it gave us a start in that Front Range area, right? So it was enough lead flow to kind of like jumpstart the business down there. And to this day, it's actually probably one of my better lead sources, probably number 3 or 4. Works out very well, and then so trucked along through the summer of 23, and one of the brokers that I had done work with, Ross Hames out of Transworld here in Colorado, great broker as well. He reached out and said, "Hey, I got this plumbing company for sale. It just has your name on it," right? I'm like, okay, sure, I'll buy it. What's so interesting about this? Well, they won't tell you the company's name till you sign their NDA, right? So I signed the NDA. Sure as God's got sandals. What's the name of the company? JD's Plumbing. And so I'm like, well, I guess I have to do this, right? So we went back and forth on this one for a little bit. John Dukes was the owner. Dude, like, great guy. And then, like, comparing that company to Mountain Valley, very different, right? So JD's Plumbing, like, they were already
Mountain
on
Valley, to be clear for the audience, Mountain Valley is the name of the first business.
Sorry. Mountain Valley is the original company I purchased. That is the umbrella name now. Check it out here, I guess, right? So there
it is.
Yeah. Like for the people listening, I got a company shirt on, right? So, so
JD's Plumbing versus Mountain Valley.
JD's Plumbing, just a very well-run company. I have to give it to John. He did a great job with this. They were doing about $1 million-ish in revenue, and operating with some very healthy margins. I mean, he was doing almost 30% net. It was a very healthy business, right? Plumbing companies can run at those kind of margins. It can be a very, very good thing because it's all labor, right? Like it's it's all labor. There's very minimal parts unless you're doing a whole bunch of water heaters or something. So we had a great plumbing side of the business. The forced air side was good, and wrote an offer. We went back and forth on it, and bought him as well through an SBA loan. Not quite as juicy of a details. The multiple is a bit higher. There's no real estate in this one, but it was business number 3. Like, one thing I've noticed, if you go to buy your second or third business, everybody all of a sudden wants to sell to you, right? So you're a proven operator. You can show that you've been successful at this. The bank, by the time I had everything to them, kind of where I was, like, before I bought the business, I was like, well, listen, hey, if the bank will finance it, then we'll do it, right? So by the time I sent everything off to the bank, they took all of 2 hours to come back and say yes. And whenever they told me yes, I was like, are you sure? Are you guys okay with this? Like, let's move. So they said yes, we did the deal.
And you think a large part of that, JD, was because of their confidence in you as a now proven operator?
It must be. I mean, that's the only thing I can really think about it, right? I mean, so at that point, I had shown a year of operating the business. I had shown growing it significantly, at least top line revenue. Bottom line, hey, there's a cost of growth for sure, but top line revenue had gone up significantly. And so showing that to the bank, and then the deal was a very good deal, and it was, I mean, like, so comparing that to the first one and the most recent one, so much easier, I mean, I've already got the license in place. I've already got proven track record running the business. It was kind of, I wouldn't call it a slam dunk. There was a little bit of competition on the LOI side, but it was about as close to a slam dunk as you can get in this world. So got that, and then have been consolidating like the back office operations of all these businesses ever since. I'd say that's about 90% complete to this day. So Mountain Valley, by the numbers, I guess, like where I started and where we are now. Started off with a company doing $1.2 million in revenue. I'm very confident we'll do about 5.5 this year. So that's like a 5x growth, and this is year 2. There's some acquisition revenue in there. So
congratulations.
The JD's, thank you very much. The JD's acquisition was about $1 million in revenue, $1.3 million, something like that. Roughly the same size, oddly enough, but a much better performing company. So there's about $1.3 million.
Wait, JD. So carve out the JD's acquisition. Carve out the one man, the my Google page and phone number. Carve out both acquisitions.
Yep.
What did you do with revenue just at Mountain Valley at your original acquisition? All the stuff that you detailed, all the things that you did what to revenue? Tripled?
3.7. So from 1.3 to, so like the last year of full financials they have is 1.2. Excuse me, that was 21's financials. In 23, we did 3.7. So that's a 3x-ish.
Yeah, almost exactly. Tripled it
the
in 2
average
years.
ticket went from $300 to $1,200. That's a lot of driving replacements. That's a big part of that. Like trying to replace equipment a little bit more aggressively than we had in the past. So something that's 15 years old, rather than trying to repair it, we'll just recommend a replacement. Giving the technicians the ability to sell stuff. So I mean, I put a tablet in their hands that has a price book, and they can sell whatever they can sell out of there. And then oddly, like, part of me thinks, like, with how much our tickets have gone up, customers should be kind of hating us a little bit, like we're price gouging or something, right? That is not the case. So like when I bought Mountain Valley, it had a 4.4 Google rating. I've got a 4.9 Google rating right now. So I mean, it's like the customers clearly like it. That was something I was very concerned about. Like, if the customer is going to be happy with all these changes, the customers like it, man. Like there's a speed to execution too that is just dramatically improved. And then like the pay I can give the technicians has gone up dramatically as well. So I mean, like, to give you an example, so whenever I first bought Mountain Valley, we were 6 weeks out to put in a furnace, right? Which put in a furnace is a half day to a day job. We were 6 weeks out for that, and we did about 1 a week at most. And that was a stretch, which anybody in the industry is probably laughing or choking or something when I say that right now, right? So, and then like all the technicians were paid hourly, strictly hourly. There were no sales incentives, nothing like that. and they were making probably on average about $25 an hour. So what would that be? Maybe $1,000 a week, right? Fast forward to today, like I told you, so we are now at the situation where we have like there's furnaces on consignment inventory in our shops, and so if you sell a furnace anywhere in Colorado, we're going to send a guy up to you right away and do it that day, right? So as a case in point, we sold a furnace. This was, a few weeks ago on a Friday at noon, which should be like, hey, we're checking out and going home and getting ready to vomit in customer sinks on Monday. So we sold this furnace, and this is actually the guy that left and came back, right? So he was part of the exodus of people. He comes back in the spring or the summer of 23. He sells a furnace Friday at 11, 12 o'clock, something like that. The warehouse stuff wasn't quite set yet. It's still not. It's a work in progress. But hey, so I hop in my truck, I drive, I pick up the furnace, I drive up there to meet him. This lady, she had no heat Friday morning. Friday afternoon, she's got heat. He's now paid him a commission standard. So he used to do one furnace a week. He was the guy, like the one furnace a week guy. He now did a furnace in an afternoon. It was a $7,000 furnace, something like that, right? So we now had a $7,000 day versus a $7,000 week at best. Yeah. And margins were higher on it. Customer gets it much faster. And then the technician, they get paid a piece of that. And so that guy effectively made in that Friday afternoon, what he would have made in a week prior. Yeah. So the technicians are making more money. The company's making more money. The customers seem happier. We've got a bigger service area, and we've 5x'd revenue. So, I mean, I guess I would say all this to say, if you're looking at a small company, there can be a lot of growth opportunities there.
Well, like I said, JD, congratulations. That's phenomenal success.
Thank you, Will.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. Let's turn now to a couple things that you said to me in the pre-call, which I thought were really interesting, that are kind of meta observations about your experience thus far. One thing was just about, and I kind of think you kind of just touched on it, but you said to me, in home services, you need to get used to charging prices that might make you feel uncomfortable. Was that what this is? That where you worry about consumers feeling like you're gouging them?
Oh yeah.
You just need to get comfortable that to have a healthy business, you need to charge a certain price, which makes you feel uncomfortable. Say more.
Yeah, I mean, I came from a commercial construction background, and that is that's a low margin endeavor. And a lot of what we try, it's very much so competitive on price. You don't want to compete on price in a residential service. You want to compete on being the best. I mean, obviously price is still a thing. I wouldn't say totally just abandon the idea of price, but like, I think 2 or 3 years ago, I would not have been proud about telling you that my average trip to a customer's house was $1,200. And like now I'm like, that's great, and it's great. I mean, it would be bad if it was $1,200 and we had a 2-star rating on Google because everybody hated us and we did a terrible job, right? But like, what I tell my guys is, hey, I want your average ticket to be $1,200, but I want you to give that customer $2,400 of value, right? And like, the plumbing is kind of a commodity. I don't care what anybody says. Plumbers will disagree with me all day long. They want to fight me over this, but like, plumbing is a commodity. Either it leaks or it doesn't. Either it's to code or it's not, right? Either it's right or it's wrong. What's not a commodity is the way you dress when you walk into a customer's house, the way that the phone gets answered by the office, the way that you present this price, the way that like the customer experience is not the commodity, right? And so I think you can find value for these customers in offering them a world-class customer experience, and you can charge accordingly for that. That was something that I very much so had to get used to. And even to this day, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. Just because I had it, drilled into my head for an 8-year elevator career that it's all about price. It's, but like even then, like in the elevator world, they don't even think that. Like they do this stuff with change orders where they try to get the elevator in for as cheap as possible, and so they get the job, and then they're making it up on the back end by charging you for things you thought you bought but you didn't, right? Well, we don't do that here in my world. Like, we're going to give you one upfront price. We're going to talk about price one time. It's going to be a very healthy price where my technicians can make 6 figures, because that's what it takes to live in Colorado. So I get happy technicians who show up well dressed, and the customer gets a great experience. So, I mean, I think you've got to get your tickets up. You've got to get your revenue up if you're in the world that I was in, but you've got to do that by bringing value to the customer. And it's not with technicians in t-shirts that look sketchy. It's with technicians who can look you in the eye and talk to you about this and tell you exactly what's going to happen, with an office that's organized and well put together. So I don't know. It's like going to a good restaurant. That's what I want my company to be like.
And that's what I'm hearing, is that it's also a decision on your part to position yourself in the market as a premium offering, not super, super expensive, but at the higher end probably of pricing, but also higher end of quality of service.
I would agree with that.
And
yes.
that's a strategic decision. I guess there's probably a world where you could argue that you want to be lower end and do higher volume, and maybe the quality isn't as good. That's the spectrum in all things, in all services. Luxury and high margin and high price versus the other end of the spectrum. And where you've chosen to play is at one end of that. Do you think that home services can work at kind of the other end of the spectrum, where you charge less but do higher volume and less quality work, or it's just that's right? Maybe that's where you came from and you don't want to go back.
There's so like as a home service company, you compete for two things. You compete for customers, obviously, and you compete for technicians. And they're very much so linked, right? And so if you're going to be a premium offering and you pay technicians better, then effectively what you're doing is, rather than being cheap for the customer, you're kind of being cheap for the technician, right? So like you're giving the technician more money. Like you're offering value to that technician, and then you're trying to get paid for it by the customer, right? And so I kind of feel like that companies in the residential home services space, I'm sure there's always going to be a demand for the chuck in a truck, as we call them, right? The guy that's, very cheap by the hour, gives you a tail light warranty, as we call it, right? But like maybe he's just known, and like he's got a certain set of customers and they're very happy with him. I think that market's very limited. I think it's very capped. I think the market for people that, like what I tell the guys is, be the guy they want to date their daughter, right? Like there's always going to be this really big market for people. I think that's where most residential people are. Like, I mean, they might complain about price a little bit, but then they leave you a 5-star review and they're happy with the service. Like, I think you're just going to find that's a bigger pool to swim in. I found that even in Estes Park. I was convinced like that this would not work well in Estes Park, and I couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, yeah, we lost customers. Don't get me wrong. Plenty of customers. We lost customers for about 2 months, and ever since then, the customers that want that level of value, they keep coming. Actually, I'm kind of rambling here, but the one thing that also sticks out to me, I feel like the volume of complaints has remained the same. Like we still get the calls about whatever, the guy tracked mud in the house or whatever happened. I feel like those calls come at the exact same rate now that we're 4 times the price than whenever we were the super cheap offering. So I don't know what to tell you. I mean,
I don't know.
Be a premium service, do a better job and charge for it. People will pay for it.
Yeah. Great. And anything more to say, JD, just about the home services business overall, or that you might tell searchers who are contemplating buying a home services business? We've touched on it a lot, but is there anything that we didn't hit that you would want to communicate?
There's a lot of people in the industry who have a wide variety of backgrounds. I do think that you're better served with a bit of a technical background walking into this. So like if you've been, I don't know, what's like an insurance salesman or something like that, may be careful buying a home services company that requires licensure, like a plumbing or an electrical company or something like that. But if you're the kind of guy that can work on a car, work on his house, I don't think that you need to have 20 years of plumbing experience to pick this stuff up. I think that you're like, as long as you're mechanically inclined, I think it's a great business to get into. And I think that while it's super competitive, I think there's a lot of depth here for people that are looking for companies to buy. Like, they're great businesses. A little bit seasonal on the HVAC side, but plumbing's not. There's some risk there that kind of sucks, but.
And JD, about the point of it being really competitive, one of the things that I've heard from my guests who are in home services is that it was booming COVID, and then in the year or so following COVID, and now it's really, what's the phrase that I heard somebody say? It's a bloodbath, that home services are a bloodbath now, that demand has gone down a lot and that it's a really competitive space. And so home services companies are having a really hard time. How do you respond to that?
I mean, I've seen a bit of a tightening, but not much. Like, we've been picking up so much market share that like it's not something that we really notice. Like, so we had a record month in January by quite a bit, but then we didn't do anything for February and March. So I don't know. I mean, it's I haven't gotten the bloodbath feeling yet, and I will say that it is a bit seasonal, especially HVAC. HVAC is super seasonal, and
Sure.
like what I've found is that there's like a set of customers, like they know they're going to need a replacement in the next year. And so they'll wait till they know it's slow and they'll get 6 bids. Like we did, I bid a job in Denver for a boiler, and the guy, like, I think he must have gotten 6 quotes. Like, he kept coming back. Like, we offer a price match guarantee. I say we don't compete on price. I throw a price match guarantee out there. Just honestly, a lot of it is to get the customer to send us quotes, and then we can kind of figure what we can do, right? But this guy would send me these quotes, and they were abysmal. Like, there were some people that went dumpster diving for sure and got that job, But at the same time, not 6 weeks later, when it's actually cold, if you can get on these jobs very quickly, you've got the work, and you've got the work at a premium. So I think a lot of it is, it's competitive, but if you can jump in very quickly and do work, do quality work quickly and on demand, you'll stay alive.
Great. The shift in employee mindset to owner mindset. This was really interesting. What was that about?
It's a different world when you work for somebody versus when you work for yourself, or like you own a business, which I would say those are two different things. Working for yourself and owning a business, that's a different animal. I'm trying to own a business, right? And back to the elevator world, even back to my military time, like, we were very price sensitive. We were, trying to be the best value for money possible, not the best value possible, like the cheapest thing we could be, And looking back at it, like, I don't know that I did the company a whole lot of favors by, trying to be more efficient with customers. Maybe we should have been out there trying to get change orders harder or something like that. Looking at it as an owner now, where you look a lot more to that revenue side, because that's cash in your checking account. It shifts your mindset a little bit. Like, you're definitely out there trying to get revenue and trying to get it from every single opportunity that you can. I mean, because cash is the lifeblood of your business. You got to have revenue. You don't have anything. And I don't know. That was
and so, JD, the difference there is that as an employee, you were trying to squeeze whatever economic value you could out of every customer engagement, whereas as owner, you're really focused on driving sales. So that's where you put your energy rather than trying to squeeze, sort of thing. Is that
I would argue it's actually the other way around. So right now I try to get as much value out of every single customer interaction as humanly possible. And that value needs to be reflected in the amount of revenue that we get off the job, really the amount of gross margin we get off that job, right? Back when I was working for a company, my goal was to not send the customer a change order, frankly. Like, that was very much so the way I thought about it, and very much so the way this was drilled into my head. And just, the company I worked for, that was the way it was. Like, some things we had to charge for, obviously, but the goal was to find a way to not charge the customer extra money, because that's how you would lose customers, quote unquote. I don't know. It's just such a, and then like the way you deal with employees too, right? So I mean, like, when you work for a large corporation, like, it's a very different standard in what you're looking for. Like there was a unionized workforce, which is a whole different animal as well, and versus what I look for now in employees, and moving through employee discipline much faster now versus then. And honestly, I have much higher expectations of my employees now than I did back in elevators. And I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but I don't know. It's And actually, too, the other thing that really, really has changed. So back in elevators, we used to get like a little metric of networking capital for every single job, right? And that's just a number on your computer screen when you work in elevators. Now, when it's your company, it's a number in a checking account on a very different computer screen. But man, it's a very different metric. And I don't know. I mean, it was everything is much more real now that I own the company, and everything. I don't know. It's you just feel it in a very different way because it's your money on the line. It's it's your bankruptcy or not on the line. Whereas whenever it's a corporation, like, okay, if that check's a week late, who really cares? It's like I look back on some of the stuff that we used to do back in elevators, and I'm like, I would never do that now, like payment terms or stuff like that. And it's just, I don't know. It's a very different experience. And I would caution anybody that's planning to make this move that, I'm 2 years into this thing and I already have a very different mindset. I can only imagine where it's going to be in 10 years.
Well, take us home, JD, with kind of big picture. How do you feel about how it's gone, or the decision that you made here to take your career in this direction? Obviously, it's gone well. So keeping that in mind, it's probably going to be positive. But just how would you put it?
I only had one moment where I kind of said, screw it in the first 2 years. I remember driving home one night. It was like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, because that's how this goes sometimes. And I called my wife and I'm like, babe, if you're done with this, I'm done with it. And Mrs. Beck, to her great credit, she said, no, I think you're enjoying it. I think you're having fun. You get a bad day. And that's the only time I've ever thought about quitting. It's been the best decision I've ever made, both financially. I mean, it's making good money. I'm living a lifestyle that I'm very happy with. I'm not flying around on private jets or anything, but not yet, I guess. I don't know. But I mean, we've got a live-in nanny. I'm able to afford to homeschool my kids. I don't even have the time to do that, which has been just like the best. Honestly, buying a business was the second best decision I ever made. Homeschooling my kids was the best. And it's been super rewarding, and it's been so rewarding in a way that I don't think a corporate job ever will be. It takes a lot out of you. I mean, I've made some decisions to sacrifice personal health and things along those lines for the good of the business.
What do you mean? You're not going to the gym as much, sort of thing?
Not as much as I would have liked to. I mean, I was definitely a 3 to 4 workouts a week and 3 to 4 times training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a week before I bought this business. Once I kind of hit that 6-month mark, I kind of had to make the decision that, hey, the business needs my time. I'll get in fitness wherever possible. And so I took about a year and a half. It was about a year and 2 months off from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and got workouts in wherever I could on top of that. But I just recently got back into that. And even then it's diminished 100%. It's not as good as it used to be. Just like the time and the mental capacity to get into the gym or get onto the mats to work on stuff is, it's challenging. And it's one of the things I'm kind of hoping with in the next few months, I've got a few just logistics changes in the shop and stuff like that I'm hoping will free up some more time. But yeah, I definitely had to make some health sacrifices for sure.
Yeah. But to be clear, JD, 3 or 4 times a week doing BJJ, 3 to 4 times a week on top of that in the gym. So 6 to 8 times a week in the gym. So you were doing a lot. So you cutting is probably cutting down to where most people are feel like they're doing pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've got the military background. We like to work out, hey, that's the way it is, right? But I mean, I was getting a little frustrated the other day, and I was like, because I had to put some money back into the business. Q1 can just be kind of a challenging time, and I had to put some money back in. I was kind of mad at the cash that I had on hand, and I realized, dude, it took me 7 years to only get to 2/3 of the amount of cash I have on hand. And I picked that up in 6 months of like running this business.
Yeah.
So the financial rewards are there. The sense of adventure is very much so there as well. This has been, I mean, like, even with all the challenges I list off here and all the ones I didn't even tell you about, this has been the most fun I've ever had, without a doubt. Like, it's an adventure, man. It's something that, how many people do this? Like, it's what, like a fraction of a percent of the population even consider doing something like this. And it is a wildly fun adventure. I get to go to Estes Park. I'm up there once or twice a week now, and it's absolutely beautiful. I get to work. I mean, granted, you start off, maybe all your employees weren't the greatest, but by the time you're 2 years into this thing, I work with people that I really enjoy working with. I get to solve problems that I find very interesting, and the money is very much so happening, and I intend for it to only get better.
Well, let's leave it there, JD. A very strong point to end on. But I'm so pleased to hear such a ringing endorsement of the path that you chose, and of course that it is going so well. But not that it's been easy. It's not like you had. I guess some of my guests might can go easier, it can go harder. It doesn't sound like yours was on the easy side of the spectrum at all. So this is a great story, even despite you really having to slog it out for the first year or two. Fair?
Fair,
yeah.
Yes.
Great. JD, if people have questions for you, how do you like them to reach out? Email, LinkedIn, Twitter? I know you're on Twitter.
Let's do X, formerly Twitter, right? So I am Dirty Hands Ops, which, terrible handle now, but it sounded cool at the time. And I guess we can put that in the show notes or whatever. Or you can email me, jd@mountainvalleyplumbing.com, but we abbreviate Mountain. So we'll put that in the show notes as well, I guess.
JD, thanks for this tour of the last 2 or so years of your life. Congratulations again. I think people will be really inspired by your story.
Thank you, Will. I look forward to seeing it. Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come. Stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.